Let's look at some passages from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. He says, "Theology is, in a sense, an experimental science. I mean that it is like the other experimental sciences in some ways, but not in all. If you are a geologist studying rocks, you have to go and find the rocks. They will not come to you, and if you go to them, they cannot run away. The initiative lies all on your side. But suppose you are a zoologist. That is a bit different from studying rocks. The wild animals will not come to you, but they can run away from you. Unless you keep very quiet, they will. There's beginning to be a little trace of initiative on their side. Now a stage higher. Suppose you want to get to know a human person. If he is determined not to let you, you will not get to know him. You have to win his confidence. In this case, the initiative is equally divided. It takes two to make a friendship. When you come to knowing God, the initiative lies on his side." Skipping ahead a bit, you can put this another way, that by saying that while in other sciences the instruments you use are things external to yourself, things like microscopes and telescopes, the instrument through which you see God is your whole self, and if a man's self is not kept clean and bright, his glimpse of God will be blurred, like the moon seen through a dirty telescope. Skipping ahead a bit more, God can show himself as he really is only to real men, and that means not simply to men who are individually good, but to men who are united together in a body, loving one another, helping one another, showing him to one another. For that is what God meant humanity to be like players in one band or organs in one body. Thus says Lewis. There is so much to comment on here. One thing I am fascinated and delighted by is the fact that Lewis and William James have independently hit upon the same insight here, that the idea that God is personal has some relevance for the idea that religious knowledge might be tested. They both believe that religious knowledge is something that can be tested, it can be verified. Our belief in God is something that can be tested in future experience, but there are limitations, because God is not a rock. God is a person, at least according to Lewis, explicitly adhering to Christian orthodoxy, according to James, looking at the major forms of religion with which he is familiar. And the idea that God is a person has relevance for how we might verify God. God, as a person, is not going to be known by us in the manner of a rock. God, as a person, is not going to give us all possible relevant evidence prior to our belief. Maybe God will give us some. Lewis, in fact, is very optimistic about that sort of thing. He's known as a Christian apologist. In early chapters of the book, he will give us his understanding of evidence that God exists. That's fine. But certain forms of evidence, certain methods of verification come about not prior to our belief, but after our belief. Knowledge of God as a person is going to be shaped in part by the circumstances that shape our knowledge of persons. And our knowledge of persons in human experience are such that they have some initiative. And they're not just going to give us all relevant evidence in advance. It takes two to make a friendship. The knowing of God, furthermore, requires that we be moral and in a corporate way. Lewis is actually describing the church here. It is the church living properly according to Christian morality's requirements, living properly in a New Testament fashion. It is this group of human beings who will be able to confirm the existence of God. The particulars of this we can study in detail. We can perhaps challenge them. We can elaborate on them, etc., etc. One thing I really want to emphasize is it's very interesting that Lewis and William James have both discovered this idea that if God is indeed a person, that has some relevance for the possibility of the verification of religious knowledge. There is likely to be such a thing. Verification of religious knowledge is a viable possibility, they both think, but it's not going to come about in quite the same way as the verification of certain forms of scientific knowledge, and we should keep that in mind. And if we follow Lewis' advice, of course, if we want to know God, we better take his advice and join a church and and live Christianly. That would be his advice anyway.